The culture died at the 9th hour, and physician ascendant Oru Vekal watched it happen through the curved wall of the containment vessel without any change in the set of his 4 hands. It was not supposed to die. Nothing the Sethric conquered cultivated had ever died in a threshold vessel. That was the point of the vessels, the point of the whole bioclade riveted into the flank of the moon, a place so controlled, so purified of accident, that a thing could be coaxed toward any shape the conquered wanted it to take. Vekal had grown attritions here that unmade entire biospheres. He had turned a warm-blooded people against their own marrow in a single season. He had made a species' children carry the end of that species in their breath, and he had done it without ever raising a hand, because the conquered did not raise hands. The conquered raised biology and let biology do the work. And now, in the vessel in front of him, the small human sample he had drawn 11 days ago sat in its warmed cradle and refused to become a weapon. Worse than refused, it thinned. The turbid richness he had watched all morning was going slack and pale, the way a fire goes to ash when the thing feeding it walks out of the room. "Reading," Vekal said. The adept at the console did not answer at once. That was its own kind of answer. "Adept Sorrel." "The reading." Nemu Sorrel's scent went sour with reluctance. The Sethric had no word for it that a human tongue could shape, a curdled note under the filtration cowls that every Sethric in the room could taste and none would name. The population is collapsing, ascendant. It was climbing until the 7th hour. Then it stopped climbing. Now it falls. Falls to what? To nothing. Projected. If the curve holds, there will be no viable material in the vessel by the 11th hour. Vekal stood very still. Around him, the culture hall breathed its soft machine breath, 10,000 vessels in their racks up the long throat of the chamber, each one a small, warm murder held in suspension, each one behaving exactly as the conquered's doctrine said it should, except this one. This one, the only one that held anything human, was undoing itself in front of a room full of the finest vector craft the conquered had ever assembled. And it was doing it calmly, without drama, the way water finds the floor. "Reculture," Vekal said. "Fresh draw. We lost the line to handling error. Log it and move." Sorrel's cowl tipped, the polite Sethric gesture that meant a subordinate had seen the same thing his superior had seen, and was choosing to believe the superior anyway. Handling error, ascendant. Log it. He did not believe it was handling error. He had drawn the sample himself. He had watched it into the cradle with his own 2 forward hands, hands that had done this work for 90 years, and he had felt the small satisfaction of a thing beginning that would end a world. There had been no error, but the alternative to error was a sentence Vekal was not prepared to speak in a hall full of adepts, and so he said handling error, and he turned, and he went to look at the human. The conquered had not chosen humanity out of malice. Malice was for lesser peoples, peoples who still believed in the fist. The conquered had chosen humanity out of arithmetic. A survey fringe of the human sphere had brushed against the conquered's outer reaches 8 years ago, and the analysts had done what analysts do, and they had come back with a number that made the whole curator rate go quiet. Humans bred fast. Humans spread faster. Humans came from a world the conquered's own classification struggled to hold in a single grade. They had settled, in the end, on category ashfall, the highest and worst designation in the ledger, reserved for biospheres so lethal that survival itself was the everyday miracle. A world where the water carried death, and the air carried death, and the ground carried death, and the things that lived there had simply grown around all of it the way a root grows around a stone, and gone on. You did not fight a people like that with fleets. Fleets were what the fist believers used, and the fist believers were all extinct or vassal now, unwritten from the ledger by the conquered's patient art. You fought a people like that the way the conquered fought everyone. You found the thing already living inside them, the small betrayal their own bodies carried, and you taught it to bloom. Every species carried such a thing. 911 peoples the conquered had unwritten, and every single one of them had, somewhere in the warm dark of itself, the seed of its own ending, waiting only for a physician patient enough to tend it. Humanity would carry one too. That was doctrine. That was the ground the whole discipline stood on. Veckel had been sent to the threshold bioclade to find the human seed, tend it, and hand the conquered a plague that humans would carry home in their own blood and give to their own children, so that the human sphere would fold inward and die without the conquered ever announcing itself. Elegant, certain, the work of perhaps 3 years. He had been at it for one, and the culture kept dying, and the human would not stop being calm. They had put her behind a wall of the same curved material as the vessels, a habitat cell at the base of the culture hall, where the vector craft could watch her the way it watched everything it grew. She was small. Veckel had studied a great many species, and he still found himself unready, each time he came to the glass, for how small the deadliest people in the ledger actually were. She sat on the low bench with her back against the wall and one knee drawn up, and she was doing the thing she did most hours of most days, which was nothing. Not the frozen nothing of a creature that has given up. A patient nothing. A waiting that had a floor under it. Her name, the intake had recorded, was Eileen Marsh. She had been a water tech on a human survey hull, 24 of her world's years old, unremarkable by every measure the conquered used to measure the peoples it unwrote. She had been taken out of a lifeboat after her hull came apart in the dark, and she had arrived at the threshold already carrying the small, mundane infection that had made Veckel's whole program possible. A lingering sickness she had caught somewhere in the ordinary course of a human life, the kind of thing a human body hosts and forgets 100 times before it dies of something else entirely. To Veckel it had looked, at intake, like a gift. Here was the seed already sprouted. Here was the betrayal already living in her. He would only have to tend it. He came to the glass, and she looked up at him the way she always did, without heat, without hope, taking his measure and finding it finite. "Ascendant," she said. The translator gave her voice back to him flattened, but he had learned to hear under the flattening by now. There was no fear in it. There had never been fear in it, and the absence had stopped being interesting and started being a problem. "The draw this morning," Veckel said. "You will give another. You took a lot this morning. You will give another." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she shifted her weight off the drawn-up knee and set both feet on the floor and held out her arm, palm up, the way she had been taught to, and Veckel felt the small wrongness of it, that she gave it, that she did not make him take it. He had unwritten peoples who fought to the last cell, who had to be held down by 4 hands while the draw was made, who screamed the whole thin length of it. This one held out her arm. This one had decided, somewhere in the first month, that the arm was not worth spending herself on, and she spent herself on nothing, and she waited. The waiting was the thing Veckel could not read. A physician learned to read a body under load. He could read fear. He could read the slow chemical surrender of a creature that has understood it will die here. He could read the bright, useless defiance of the young. He could not read a person who had simply decided to outlast him and was, so far, correct. The reculture failed at the 9th hour again, and again the 3rd time, and again. By the end of the first quarter, Veckel had 4 dead lines logged as handling error, and a scent in the culture hall that the adepts had stopped trying to hide, a low sourness that meant the room no longer believed the log. He stood at the console with Sorrel and watched the 4th line thin toward nothing, and he made himself say the sentence he had refused to say, because a physician who could not say the true thing was no use to the conquered. "It is not handling error," Veckel said. Sorrel's cowl went very still. "The sample is climbing until we begin to shape it," Veckel said. "The moment we begin the turning, it stops climbing. It does not die of our shaping. It dies of leaving. It withdraws its own richness, as though it will not be present for what we intend to make of it." He turned the reading over once in the light of the console. "Draw the comparison lines, every attrition in the last 30 years. I want to see the day 9 curve of every seed we have ever tended, laid against this one. It took the adepts a shift to build it, and when they built it, the culture hall got quiet in the way. A hall gets quiet when something has been seen that cannot be walked back. Every seed the conquered had ever tended climbed. That was the shape of the discipline. You took the small betrayal a body carried, and in the clean, warm certainty of a threshold vessel, freed of the thousand cruelties of its home biosphere, it flourished. It bloomed. It became, in the vessel, the thing it had never quite dared to become inside its host, and then you handed it back to the host's own people, and it did to them what it had always half wanted to do. 911 climbing curves. 911 peoples who had carried their own ending and never known it. And then the human line, which climbed and reached the moment of shaping and turned and came down and went to nothing, and did it every single time calmly, the way water finds the floor. It thrives until we want it, Sorrel said, very low, and then it will not be wanted. Log that differently, Veckel said, or do not log it at all. He did not sleep that cycle. The Sethric did not sleep as humans slept, but they had their own long stillness, and Veckel did not take it. He stood at the glass of the habitat cell in the dimmed hall and watched the human breathe, and he tried to understand what he was looking at, and he could not. The doctrine said every body carried its own ending. The doctrine had never been wrong. 911 times it had been the truest thing the conquered knew, truer than gravity, and Veckel had built 90 years of his life on the flat certainty of it. And here was a small water tech from a category HFY world, sitting with her back to the wall, whose ending would not come out of her. Not because she hid it. Because, and this was the thing that kept Veckel at the glass all through the dimmed hours, because whatever the human body was, it had gotten to the ending first. It had met the small betrayal she carried, the one Veckel had thought was a gift, and it had done something to it, unhurried, across the long, lethal generations of a world where every body met 1,000 such betrayals before breakfast, and it had made the betrayal into something that could no longer betray. Her infection was not a seed waiting to bloom. It was a war already won, so long ago and so completely that she did not even carry the memory of the fighting. She had been to the place Veckel wanted to take her, and she had come back, and she had gone on being a water tech. He did not have the language for it yet. He would not have the language for it for a long time. But standing at the glass in the dark, he felt, for the first time in 90 years, the floor of his discipline move under him. Behind him in their racks, the 10,000 other vessels breathed their small, warm murders, each behaving exactly as doctrine said it should. And the one that mattered undid itself again, calmly, and went to nothing. And Aline Marsh slept against the wall of her cell and did not know she had already won a war the conquered had not yet finished starting. When the shift cycle turned, Veckel filed his report to the curatorate the way doctrine required, and doctrine required optimism, and so he wrote that the human line was proving unusually robust, and that additional shaping regimes were under development. And he sealed it and sent it into the dark toward the conquered's heart, and he knew, filing it, that he had just written the first lie of a career that had never needed one. Then he went back to the glass. She was awake. She had the trick of coming awake without any of the fuss a body usually made about it. One moment the slow breath of sleep, the next her eyes open and already on him, already reading, already unimpressed. "You didn't leave," she said. "No. It's not working, not a question." She had watched him through the glass for a year the way he had watched her, and she was not a fool. A person did not have to understand vectorcraft to understand a physician who stood at the glass all night with the set gone out of his hands. The thing you're trying to do, it's not working. Veckel considered, for a moment, the whole weight of the conquered's doctrine, the 911 curves, the moon riveted with vessels, the elegance of a war fought without a fist. Then he considered the small woman on the other side of the glass, who had held out her arm every time, and who had just told him the truth of his own program more plainly than he had been willing to write it to his masters. "No," he said, It is not working. It won't, she said, not a threat. She said it the way she said everything, flat, tired, certain, a person stating the weather. You should have let me go home a year ago. You'd have less to clean up. You do not understand what we are attempting. I understand it fine. She drew her knee back up and set her chin on it and looked at him through the curved glass that had held 911 endings and would not hold hers. You're trying to make me into something that hurts my own people, and my body already ate that idea, a long time before you ever found me. She almost smiled. She did not quite. We're a bad world to try that on. You'd know that if you'd read the file all the way down instead of the part you liked. Vekel did not answer. There was, for the first time in 90 years, nothing in the doctrine to answer with. He turned from the glass and went back into the hall, where the vessels breathed, and where the one line that mattered climbed toward the 9th hour and the moment of shaping, and he stood at the console and watched it. And at the 9th hour it turned and came down and went calmly to nothing, exactly as she had said it would, and the whole hall smelled of a sourness that no cowl could filter, and the human, behind her glass, went back to sleep. The curatorate did not send its concern in words. It sent Overseer Vashti Threll. She came on the supply hull that fed the threshold once every 40 cycles, and she came without announcement, which was itself the announcement, and Vekel understood the moment her scent reached him down the access throat that his optimistic report had been read exactly as the lie it was. Threll was the conquered's living memory of the discipline. She attended the seat of the Vuren, the great migratory people whose ending was still taught as the discipline's purest work. She had stood at the vessel when the Vuren line first bloomed and had known, before anyone, that a species was over. She was older than Vekel by a full generation, her 4 hands gone translucent at the joints with age, her cowl marked with the deporter sigils that meant the curatorate's own hand moved when hers did. She did not come to the threshold to help. She came to see whether Vekel should be replaced, and by what. "Show me the curves," she said before she had finished arriving. "Not the report, the curves." He showed her the curves. He watched her read the human line, the climb and the calm turn and the going to nothing, laid against the 911 that climbed and kept climbing, and he watched the ancient stillness settle over her that he had felt settle over himself in the dark, and he took a small unworthy comfort in it, because if the discipline's living memory could not read the human line either, then Vekel was not failing. The line was simply not a thing the discipline had ever seen. "How many draws?" Threll said. 41. Across the year. And she gives them. She gives them, she holds out her arm. Threll's cowl tipped a degree, the gesture Sorrel had used, the one that meant a thing had been seen and set aside as unbelievable. A candidate people do not give the draw. In 90 years of your work and 140 of mine, I have never tended a body that gave the draw. They fight, or they fail, or they weep, and we hold them down and we take what we need and we make it bloom. What kind of creature holds out its arm? One that has decided the arm is not worth spending, Vekel said. I have thought about it a great deal, Overseer. I believe she gives the draw because she does not believe the draw can be used against her. And I believe, he made himself say it, that she is correct, and that she has been correct since before we took her, and that the doctrine did not account for her because there has never been a her to account for. The scent that came off Threll then was not anger. Vekel had braced for anger. It was worse. It was interest, the cold, total interest of a physician who has found, at the far end of a long career, a case that might unmake everything she has ever known, and who intends to take it apart to the last cell to find out. Then we are agreed that the ordinary shaping has failed, Threll said. Good. We stop pretending it will work if we simply do it harder. We change the ground. She turned toward the habitat cell, toward the small shape behind the curved glass. Tell me about her sickness, the one she carried in. Vekel told her. A mundane thing, a lingering infection of the kind human bodies host and forget, present in a Lynn marsh at intake, the seed his whole program had been built to bloom. Threll listened, and when he was done she was quiet a while, and then she said the thing that turned the program onto its second and worse road. "You have been trying to bloom a seed that is not a seed," she said. "You said it yourself in the dark. I can taste that you did." Her body already met this thing and ended it long ago, so completely she carries no memory of the fight. So, we stop asking the calm sickness to become a weapon. A one war will not fight again for us. You cannot relight an ash. Instead, we make her body fight a new war. We put it under load. We stress the host until the old ordered defense breaks its ranks, until the body is too busy surviving to keep its one piece. And in that gap, in the moment the deathworld body is finally overwhelmed, we take what spills out of the breach and we shape that. She looked at him with the interest still cold in her. Every body has a breaking load, ascendant, even an ashfall body. We have simply been too gentle to find hers. Vekel did not like it. He told himself it was doctrine, and he did not like it, and he could not have said then where the dislike came from. He would understand it later. It came from the glass. It came from a year of standing at the glass and watching a small woman hold out her arm, and from the slow, unwelcome knowledge that whatever else the conquered had classified Elin Marsh as, she had never once been cruel to him, and he was about to be a great deal worse than cruel to her, and call it the discipline. "She is a candidate," Threll said, reading his hesitation off the air. "Not a person. The discipline does not survive physicians who forget the difference." "I have not forgotten it," Vekel said, and knew as he said it that he was beginning to. They changed the ground. The load regimes had names in the discipline that Vekel will not repeat even now, and the names do not matter, because none of them worked. And a method that does not work does not deserve to be described. What matters is the shape of what happened, which was always the same shape, cycle after cycle, and which Vekel came to know the way a man comes to know a recurring dream. They put Elin Marsh's body under load. They pushed it toward the breaking place the discipline swore every body had, and her body, without any drama, without any heroism she would ever have claimed, met the load the way it had met the infection. The way Vekel came slowly to understand. An ashfall body met everything, because an ashfall body had spent 1,000,000 years meeting things that would have unwritten any other people in an afternoon. It absorbed. It reordered. It found the new war and won the new war, and did it so far ahead of the instruments that the instruments kept reporting a breach that never came. Threll's regime called for the defense to break its ranks. The defense did not break its ranks. The defense simply widened, took in the new threat and closed over it and went on. Every load they found a way to apply, the body had a way to answer that was older than the load, and the answer was always already there, waiting, the way her waiting behind the glass had a floor under it. "She should be failing," Threll said on the 6th cycle at the console in a voice that had lost the cold interest and found something under it that Vekel had not expected. "By every curve I have ever tended, she should be failing now. The load is past the Vuren load. It is past loads that ended peoples who thought they were strong. She should be—" Threll stopped. Her translucent joints had gone the pale color that meant a Sethric was holding very still against something. "What is she doing, Vekel? What is the body doing that I cannot see?" "Getting there first," Vekel said quietly. He had found the words at last in the dark at the glass. "Whatever we bring, Overseer, it has been brought to her before by her own world 10,000 times, and her kind answered it, or her kind is not here. We are not introducing a threat. We are introducing a memory, and her body remembers winning." Through the glass, Elin Marsh sat with her back to the wall through all of it. They had moved her, for the load regimes, into a harder cell, wired to the instruments, and she had walked into it the way she did everything, without argument and without surrender, and she had settled against the wall and drawn up one knee and begun, again, to wait. On the worst cycles her breathing changed. Her skin took on a sheen the instruments called distress, and Vekel, watching, called suffering, because that was what it was, and he had stopped being able to lie to himself even when he went on lying to the report. She suffered. The load was real and it hurt her, and Vekel watched it hurt her through the curved glass, and hated with a slow-growing private heat the discipline that was making him watch. And she did not break. She rode the load down into its depth, and she stayed there, small and calm and hurting, and then the load passed and her body was already up the other side of it, reordered, closed over, gone on. Once, on the 8th cycle, when a regime had held her at the depth longer than any before it, she opened her eyes and found Vekel at the glass and said, through the flattening translator, in a voice with no drama left in it at all, "You can't scare it out of me. There's nothing in here that hasn't already tried worse than you." A long breath. "My grandmother buried 4 children before she was 30 and lived to 81. My body comes from her body. You're a bad afternoon. We are a bad world. Let me go home." "I cannot," Vekel said. "I know," she said, and closed her eyes and rode the load back down and did not break. The equipment broke first. That was the thing no one in the discipline had a curve for, and it was the thing that began, in the end, to end them. The Threshold's instruments had been built to hold 911 kinds of dying, and they had held them, because dying was a thing the instruments understood. They had not been built to run a body at load, cycle after cycle, that would not die and would not stop and would not resolve, that simply absorbed and reordered and demanded, by the sheer fact of its surviving, that the instruments keep pushing past every ceiling they had been rated to. The load regimes ran the apparatus at its limits, and then past its limits, because Alin Marsh's body kept moving the limit, and an instrument run forever past its ceiling does what all made things do. On the 11th cycle, a primary manifold in the load array failed, not gently, and took a quarter of the culture hall's environmental order with it. And for a full shift, the 10,000 vessels in their racks hung one manifold away from spoiling, and the adepts ran the throat of the chamber in a controlled panic while Alin Marsh, in her wired cell, watched them run and said nothing and waited. Threll stood at the console through the whole shift with her translucent hands flat on the surface, and did not help and did not leave. When the manifold was stabilized, she spoke, and her voice had changed again, and Vekel heard in it, for the first time, the thin edge of a physician who is beginning to be afraid of her own case. "We are spending the threshold to load her," Threll said. "Do you understand what I am saying, Ascendant? We are burning the finest apparatus the Conquered has ever built, and it is failing, and she is not. The instruments break and she reorders. We have built a machine to find the breaking place of a body, and the body is finding the breaking place of the machine." "Yes," Vekel said. "That is not supposed to be possible." "No." Threll was quiet a long moment. In the dimmed hall, the recovered vessels breathed their small, warm murders, and the wired cell glowed with its instruments. And inside it, the small woman from the HFY world sat against the wall with her knee drawn up, and rode down the aftermath of a load that should have ended a people, and came up the other side of it, and went on. "Log it as apparatus fatigue," Threll said at last. "Requisition replacement manifolds from the curator rate. Do not," and here the discipline's living memory paused, and chose her next words the way a person chooses steps across bad ice. "Do not put in the requisition Y." Vekel filed the requisition. He did not put in Y. It was the second lie of his career, and it would not be the last, and standing at the console filing it, he understood that the program had already changed its true purpose, though no one in the hall would say so for a long time yet. It was no longer a program to unwrite humanity. It had quietly become a program to prove that humanity could be unwritten at all, to save the doctrine, to save the 911 curves, and the moon full of vessels, and the whole clean, elegant certainty that every body carried its own ending. They were no longer trying to end her. They were trying, cycle after failing cycle, to prove she could be ended, so that the discipline would not have to look at what it meant that she could not. And she could not. That was the thing the whole threshold was slowly, expensively, catastrophically learning. She could not, because her body had gotten to every ending first, 1,000,000 years before the Conquered ever riveted its vessels into the moon, and no requisition and no regime and no living memory of the discipline was going to change the order of that arrival. Vekel went to the glass when the shift ended. She was awake, as she often was now after a load, her eyes open in the dim, her breathing slowly climbing back up out of the depth. "You lost a machine today," she said. "Yes." "You'll lose more. No triumph in it, just the weather. You're building everything you've got against a wall that's older than you, and the wall doesn't even know you're pushing on it. That's the part you can't stand, isn't it? Not that I'm strong, that I'm not even trying." Vekel stood at the glass a long time before he answered, and when he answered it was not to her. Not really. It was to the 90 years behind him and the doctrine going soft under his feet. "No," he said, "I cannot stand that you are not even trying." Elaine Marsh looked at him through the glass that had held 911 endings, and something in her face that was almost, but not quite pity, and she said, "Then let me go home, Ascendant, before you find out how much of your world you'll spend learning that." He did not answer. Behind him the vessels breathed. And the requisition went out into the dark toward the Concord's heart, asking for new machines to break against a woman who was not even trying, and the second and worse road of the program ran on. Before the road could run far, the Curatorate did a thing it had never done to Vekel in 90 years. It doubted him. Not the doctrine was beyond doubt, but him, the physician, the pair of forward hands that kept filing failures the ledger had no room for. A run of failures that deep, the Curatorate reasoned, was more likely a flaw in the tending than a flaw in the tended, and so it sent ahead of any new apparatus a verification. It sent Specialist Oru Sen, a xenophysiologist from a hall Vekel had never worked, a cold, precise creature of the discipline's auditing arm whose whole function was to be sent to failing programs and determine whether the failure was real or the failure was the physician. Sen arrived believing it was Vekel. Sen arrived, in fact, faintly contemptuous, in the manner of the auditing arm, certain that a candidate who gave the draw and would not bloom was simply being mishandled by a hall grown careless, and that a fresh, disciplined eye would find the error in an afternoon and set the program right and file the note that ended an old ascendant's career. Vekel did not resent it. He had passed, by then, the place where resentment lived. He handed Specialist Sen the whole record, the curves, the loads, the dead lines logged as handling error that had never been handling error, and he stood back and let the auditing arm do to his year what the auditing arm did, and he waited, the way she had taught the whole hall to wait, for the disciplined fresh eye to arrive where he had arrived. Sen ruled out the physician first, thoroughly, coldly, in the way of the audit. Sen redrew the samples personally, with the auditor's own 2 hands, so that no handling of Vekel's could be blamed. Sen recultured under the auditor's own regime, sealed against every accident an old careless hall might introduce. And Sen watched the line climb to the 9th hour and reach the moment of shaping and turn and come down and go calmly to nothing, exactly as it had for Vekel. Under hands the auditing arm could not fault, and the contempt went out of the specialists, sent the way heat goes out of a stone at nightfall. "It is not the tending," Sen said at the console on the 4th day. "The admission cost the auditor something. Vekel could taste it. I came to find a careless hall. The hall is not careless. The line dies under my own hands as readily as under yours, and it dies the same way, not of our shaping, of leaving. I have audited 40 failing programs, ascendant. Every one of them was the physician. This is not the physician." Sen was quiet a moment, and then said the thing that told Vekel the auditor had arrived where he had arrived. "This is the candidate, and a candidate is not permitted to be the reason. There is no line in the audit for a candidate that is the reason." "No," Vekel said, "there is not. I have looked." Sen did not accept it, not yet, because the auditing arm did not accept things. It verified them, and to verify this the specialist proposed a series that Vekel had not tried and did not like and did not have the standing, under audit, to refuse. Sen wanted to rule out that the candidate was, in some fashion, the discipline had not modeled. Cheating, that some deliberate act of the hosts, some withholding, some trick of a canny prisoner was defeating the shaping, and that if the host were sufficiently reduced, sufficiently emptied of the capacity to withhold, the line would finally behave. So they took Elin Marsh into a bare chamber and they took from her, one by one, the things a body uses to hold itself together: the light, the sound, the reckoning of time, the small anchors by which a mind keeps its floor under it, and they left her in the empty dark. And they watched, day on day, for the withholding to break, for the trick to fail, for the line drawn from an emptied prisoner to finally climb and bloom. Vekel made himself watch. He had decided, somewhere in the year, that he would not let anything be done to her that he was not willing to witness, and it was a poor decision. It saved her nothing. It was only a way of keeping his own honesty, and he kept it. He watched them empty her out. And he watched the thing that broke Specialist Sen, which was not that she withheld, but that she did not, that there was no trick, there had never been a trick, that a canny prisoner defeating the shaping by an act of will would have been, to the auditing arm, a comprehensible thing, a solvable thing, and what they found instead in the empty dark was worse than a trick, because it was nothing. She did not fight the deprivation. She did what she always did. She found the floor under it, the floor that had a floor under it, and she settled onto that floor and waited, hour on emptied hour, and her body went on doing in the dark exactly what it did in the light, which was meet each new lack as one more lethal thing to survive and survive it, unhurried, without any act of will she could have named, because the surviving was not a thing she did, it was a thing she was. On the 6th day of the emptied dark, Sen had the light brought up to take a reading, and Elin Marsh sat against the wall of the bare chamber where they had put her, hollowed and gray, and past the end of any endurance the audit had a number for, and she found Vekel at the observation port, because she always found him, and she spoke, and the translator flattened it, and even hollowed and gray and emptied it was steadier than the auditor standing beside him. "You brought in a new one," she said. Her voice came from very far down, cold, precise, came to check whether the last one was doing it wrong, a slow breath. "Tell the new one it's not a trick, I'm not doing anything. I keep telling you people that and none of you can hear it, because if I'm not doing anything then there's nothing to catch, and your whole art is catching. I'm not withholding. I've got nothing to withhold within here anymore. You took it all. And it doesn't matter, because the thing you're trying to reach was never in the part you can take. You could empty me down to nothing and the nothing would still get there first. That's not withholding. That's just what's left when everything a person can spend is gone. The bottom of us isn't a trick, it's a floor, and it holds." Specialist Sen filed the true audit. Vekel had not been certain the auditor would. The auditing arm had ways of writing failure that protected the doctrine even when they doomed the physician, and it would have been the easy thing, the career-safe thing, to write that the threshold's failure was Vekel's after all and leave the ledger unwounded. Sen did not take the easy thing. Whatever the empty dark had done to the auditor, it had done the thing a year at the glass had done to Vekel. It had made the comfortable lie unbearable next to the fact. Sen filed that the tending was sound. The hall was not careless, and the failure was real and reproducible and located, against every line the audit contained, in the candidate herself. Then Sen left the threshold on the next hull, faster than the arrival had been, in the manner of a creature putting distance between itself and a thing it did not wish to have seen, and Vekel never heard the specialist's name again, and understood that the auditing arm had quietly folded that audit away, because an institution that sends verification does not want the verification to come back saying the doctrine is the thing that failed. But it was filed. That was the point, and Vekel held on to it through everything that came after. Somewhere in the curator's own house there was now an audit, in the auditing arm's own cold, precise hand, that said the failure was real. The conquered could strip Threll and confine Sorrel and set Vekel aside and unchoose the human sphere and fold the discipline quietly away, and still, in its own records, filed by its own auditor, There would be the sentence it least wished to have written, that a candidate had been the reason, and that there was no line for it, and that they had looked. They brought Ellen Marsh up out of the empty dark and put her back in the cell at the base of the culture hall, and it took her body 4 days to climb back up out of the hollow to where she could sit against the wall and draw up her knee, and Vekel watched every hour of the climbing, and on the 4th day she was herself again, gray still, thinner, but herself, waiting, the floor back under her the way it had never actually left. "The cold one's gone," she said, when Vekel came to the glass. Yes, he filed the truth and he left. He did not want to have seen it. "They never do." She was quiet a moment. "You keep sending new ones, ascendant, the old one the memory, now the auditor. Each one comes surer than the last, and each one leaves having seen the same thing, and none of it changes what you do next, because the thing they see doesn't fit anywhere you can put it. You've got a whole civilization built to catch, and I'm a thing that can't be caught, and instead of writing that down and going home, you keep sending me a fresh pair of hands to fail with." She set her forehead against her knee. "How many more do you think? Before it's the hands themselves you run out of." Vekel did not answer, because the answer was the harvest program, already being requisitioned, already the next fresh pair of hands the conquered would fail with, and he did not yet have it in him to tell her that the surest and worst of the roads was still ahead. The new manifolds came on the next supply hull, and Threll signed for them with her own translucent hand, and in signing for them she staked something she had never staked in 140 years, which was her name. A requisition of that size did not move through the curatorate unseen. When Overseer Vashti Threll, the discipline's living memory, drew that much apparatus to a single candidate, the curatorate understood it as a promise. The promise was, "This will be worth it. This will end the way my work has always ended. Hand me the machines and I will hand you humanity's seed." Threll made the promise because the alternative to making it was to file a report that said the doctrine had met a body it could not unwrite, and that report was not a thing Threll was willing to be the one to file. So she signed, and she staked her name against a small water tech who was not even trying, and the whole weight of it came to rest, cycle by cycle, on the curved glass of a cell at the base of the culture hall. "We have been thinking too small," Threll said, when the new apparatus was seated. She had gathered the senior adepts in the console gallery, Vekel and Sorrel and 4 others, and she stood before them with the confidence of the discipline pulled back around her like a cloak she had briefly set down and now took up again. "We have been trying to break the host and take what spills from the breach, but the host will not breach, so we stop waiting for the spill. We go in and we take the one war itself. We harvest the very thing her body used to end her sickness, the ordered defense, the memory of winning, and we turn that. If her strength is a made thing, adepts, then it can be unmade, and if it can be unmade, it can be inverted, and a defense inverted is the finest weapon the discipline has ever dreamed of. We will not give humanity a plague. We will give humanity its own strength, turned inward. We will make the thing that keeps them alive into the thing that kills them." It was, Vekel admitted even now, a beautiful idea. It was the most beautiful idea the discipline had ever had, and it was born entirely of desperation, and it failed more completely than anything the threshold had tried yet, and it failed in a way that began, at last, to consume the threshold itself. Because you could not harvest the one war. Vekel understood this before the first attempt and said so and was overruled, and he did not fight the overruling as hard as he should have, and he has carried that. You could not harvest it because it was not a thing that sat still to be taken. It was not an organ or a fluid or a seed. It was a process, restless, self-renewing, a body's whole ceaseless argument with a lethal world, and the moment you drew it out of the host and into a vessel to invert it, it did what it had always done. It met the new condition, the vessel, the inversion itself, as one more threat, and it answered the threat, and the answer was to reorder, to close over, to win. They tried to turn her strength into a weapon, and her strength, even outside her body, even in the vessel, treated their turning as one more thing an ashfall world had thrown at it, and got there first, and neutralized it, calmly, the way it neutralized everything. And then it did the thing that no curve had prepared them for. It did not merely die in the vessel, the way the early cultures had died. It stayed alive, and it stayed itself, and it treated the whole apparatus around it as the hostile environment it now was, and it began, slowly, patiently, without any malice because it had no malice, to win against that too. The harvested defense denied its host, took the threshold's own systems for its new world, and set about surviving in them the way an ashfall body survived in anything, by unmaking whatever came at it. It fouled the vessels it was placed in so that they could hold nothing after. It moved, through the shared environmental order of the culture hall, into vessels it had never been placed in, and where it went the careful cultures of other people's endings met something older and more stubborn than themselves, and were, quietly, overrun. On the fourth cycle of the harvest program, the adepts came in at shift turn to find 9 of the 10,000 vessels gone inert, 9 of the Concord's carefully tended endings, seeds gathered from 9 unwritten peoples, undone in the dark by a human body's refusal to be a weapon. By the 9th cycle, it was 90. Veckel walked the throat of the chamber that cycle himself, passed rack on rack of the discipline's memory, and counted the dead vessels with his own eyes because he did not trust the console to make it real to him. Each inert vessel had been a people once, gathered and tended and held against need, and each one now held only the flat suspension of a thing that had met something older than itself and lost. He stopped at the vessel that had held the Vurin seed, Threll's purest work, the ending the discipline still taught, and he found it going pale from the edge inward, and he stood there a long time in the smell of a hall that had stopped pretending, and understood that a body's refusal to be a weapon was, in its patient way, unmaking 2 centuries one seed at a time, and that no hand in the Concord knew how to make it stop. "It is eating the library," Sorrel said. He said it very quietly at the console in the smell of a hall that had stopped pretending. The tissue library was the Concord's memory made flesh. Samples of every ending the discipline had ever tended, 911 peoples held in cold suspension against the day they might be needed again, the single most valuable archive in the Concord's keeping. And a woman's one war, harvested against her and denied its home, was moving through that archive vessel by vessel and unwriting the unwritings, meeting each carefully cultured death and treating it as one more lethal thing to survive, and surviving it and leaving nothing behind but inert suspension where an ending used to be. Ascendant, it is eating the library. It does not know it is doing it. It is only living. And everything the discipline has ever made, it treats as something to live through. Veckel stood at the console and watched the count climb 90 vessels, then 110, then 140, and he felt the thing that had been coming for him since the 9th hour of the first culture arrive at last and settle over him whole. It was not fear, though fear was in it. It was something the discipline had no sigil for. It was the understanding that the Concord had spent 911 victories on the belief that every body carried its own ending, and had built its entire art on being the patient tender of other people's deaths, and had never once, in all that clean, elegant certainty, imagined a body whose whole nature was to end endings. A body from a world so lethal that ending things was simply what it did, ceaselessly, without thought, the way the Sethric breathed. They had brought that body into the heart of their memory. They had harvested its strength and set that strength loose among their archive. And the strength was doing to the Concord's 911 deaths exactly what it had done to the small sickness Alin Marsh had carried in meeting it, getting there first, and winning. "Seal the library," Threll said. Her voice had gone flat in a way Veckel had not heard from her before. The flatness of a physician watching a case escape the last of her control. "Full isolation. Cut the shared order to the archive. Now." They cut it. It was not enough. You could isolate the archive from the culture hall, but you could not isolate it from the fact that the human defense was already inside it, and once inside it did what it did, and the seals only meant that it did it in the dark, unwatched, at its own patient pace. Over the next 4 cycles, the count of lost endings passed 200, and the threshold's environmental order, the vast, delicate, decades-tuned balance that let 10,000 deaths sit side by side without touching, began to come apart under the strain of 1,000 small isolations and rebalancings, each one a wound the station had not been built to take. Manifolds failed. Cradles spoiled. The soft machine breath of the culture hall went ragged. And through all of it, in the wired cell at the base of the hall, Elin Marsh sat with her back to the wall and her knee drawn up and watched the adepts run themselves ragged through the curved glass. And she did not gloat, because gloating was a thing you did when a thing was in doubt, and nothing here was in doubt. Vekel went to her on the 5th cycle of the Harvest program, when the count of lost endings passed 230 and Threll had shut herself in the gallery with the archive readings and would not come out. He did not go to threaten her. There was nothing left to threaten her with. The discipline had thrown everything it had at her body, and her body had not so much as noticed. He went because he did not know what else to do, and because she was the only person in the threshold who was not afraid. And after a year at the glass, he found he wanted badly to be near the one calm thing in a hall that was coming apart. "Your library's dying," she said when he reached the glass. She had felt the station change around her. She was a water tech, she read systems, she had felt the soft breath go ragged. "Whatever you took out of me, it got loose in your archive, didn't it?" "Yes. And it's winning." "It is not winning," Vekel said, and heard how thin it sounded. "It does not know it is in a fight, it is only surviving." Something moved across Elin Marsh's face, then that Vekel had not seen in a year of watching her, and it took him a moment to name it, and when he named it his 4 hands went still, because it was grief. Not for herself, for him, for the whole hall of them. "That's the part you still don't understand," she said quietly through the flattening translator. "You keep saying it like it's a comfort. It doesn't know it's in a fight." "Ascendant, that's not a comfort. That's the whole thing. That's my whole world. Nothing back home is trying to beat you. The water isn't trying, the cold isn't trying, the things in the dark aren't trying. They just don't stop. And we grew up in all of it, and we don't stop either, and we don't even feel special about it, because to us it's just Tuesday." She set her forehead against her drawn-up knee for a moment, and when she lifted it her eyes were dry and level and terribly tired. "You went looking for the thing inside us that would kill us, and you found the thing inside us that keeps us alive, and you pulled it out and pointed it at your own house, and now it's doing to your house what it does to everything. It's just living. And your whole beautiful clean art is made of careful death, and careful death has never once in its life met something that just lives, harder than the dying can keep up with." Vekel stood at the glass with the ragged breath of the dying station in the air around him, and the count of lost endings climbing in the gallery he could not enter. And he understood that she had described, in the plain, tired words of a water tech, the exact shape of the thing the discipline had spent 911 victories never having to learn. "Let me go home, Ascendant," Elin Marsh said, for what he thought must be the 100th time, and it did not sound like a plea. It never sounded like a plea. It sounded like a woman offering him, one last time, the only exit left in the building. "You've already lost. You lost the first afternoon. Everything you've done since has just been finding out how much it costs to lose to us. Send me home and stop paying." Vekel did not answer. He could not. To answer would have been to say the sentence, and the sentence was not his to say. It belonged to the curatorate and to Threll, and to a doctrine that would rather spend the finest archive in the conquered than admit it had met a wall it could not push. He turned from the glass. Behind him the station breathed its ragged breath, and the human sat with her back to the wall, calm in a hall of panic, the still point in a machine that was tearing itself apart trying to prove she could be torn. In the gallery, Threll had begun, at last, to file the report she had staked her name against never having to file. Veckel could smell it on the air through the sealed door, the particular sourness of 140 years coming to the edge of the thing they could not do, and he stood in the rag-breathing hall between the sealed gallery and the calm woman, and he waited, the way she had taught the whole station to wait, for the count to climb. The curatorate did not accept the report. That was the thing Veckel came, in the end, to understand about the people he had served for 90 years. They would spend anything rather than accept a fact that unmade them. Threll's report reached the Concord's heart, and the Concord's heart read it, and the Concord's heart sent back, on the next hull, not relief and not a recall but a single deporter directive, sealed with sigils Veckel had seen only twice in his life, and the directive said, in the compressed and merciless language of the curatorate, "The doctrine does not fail. Find the demonstration. Spare nothing." Spare nothing. Veckel had read those two words in the histories, attached to the endings of peoples the discipline no longer named aloud, and he had never once thought to see them turned toward the inside of a conquered station. But the curatorate had understood correctly what Threll's report meant. It did not mean that one candidate had proved difficult. It meant that if a single body in the ledger could not be unwritten, then the ledger was a lie, and the 911 victories were not victories, but accidents of who the conquered had happened to meet, and the whole clean, elegant certainty that the conquered was the patient master of all biology was a story the conquered had been telling itself, while the truly lethal peoples of the galaxy had simply not yet come to its attention. The curatorate would rather burn the threshold to the mounting rings than let that sentence be true, and so spare nothing. Threll came out of the sealed gallery to read the directive to the senior adepts, and Veckel saw what 4 cycles alone with the dying archive had done to the discipline's living memory. She had aged. Her translucent joints had gone the deep pale of a Sethric near the end of endurance, and her scent had lost the cold interest and the flat control both, and what was left under them was something Veckel had never smelled off Threll in 140 years of her legend. The sourness of a physician who has understood that she is going to lose, and who has been ordered to keep losing anyway expensively in front of everyone until the losing is complete. Spare nothing, Threll read and set the directive down and looked at the adepts with eyes gone dim. You understand what it asks. We take the host to the true limit, not the load regimes, those were courtesies. We take her to the place a body cannot come back from, and we hold her there, and when her body finally cannot get there first, when it finally meets the one thing older than its answering, we harvest the failure and we prove the doctrine. One demonstration. That is all the curatorate asks. One body, proven mortal, proven turnable, and the ledger stands. She was quiet a moment. The station will likely not survive it. The archive is already lost. The environmental order is failing. But if we hand the curatorate the demonstration, the threshold will have died for the doctrine, and that is a death the discipline knows how to honor. Sorrel spoke. Veckel had not expected it, and he would remember it later, as the first clean thing anyone in the threshold had said in a year. The adept's scent was steady, which took more courage in that room than Veckel had known the young ones held. Overseer, Sorrel said, we have taken her past the Vuren lode. We have taken her past loads that ended peoples the discipline built its histories on. Every time her body got there first. The directive asks us to find the place her body cannot get to first. Overseer, with respect, I have watched her for a year, and I no longer believe that place exists. I believe we are being ordered to find the edge of a thing that has no edge, and I believe we will spend the station and our names finding out that it has no edge, and the ledger will fall anyway, only later, and with more of us buried under it. He stopped. The room had gone very still. I think the demonstration the curatorate is looking for has already happened. I think we are standing inside it. I think the demonstration is that we cannot do this, and it has been running for a year, and every cycle we refuse to read it costs us another piece of the conquered. Threll looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, without heat, in the dead flat voice of the directive, Noted, adept, removed from the program, Confine yourself to quarters." And Sorrel inclined his cowl and left the gallery, and Vekel watched the one person in the threshold who had said the true thing walk out under confinement and said nothing, and has carried that too. They took Elin Marsh to the true limit over the next 11 cycles, and Vekel will not describe it, and not only because the discipline forbids it. He will not describe it because he was there, at the glass, for all of it, and a man does not describe the 11 cycles in which he helped hold a person at the edge of what a body can bear and watched her not break. He will say only this, because it is the part that matters and the part the conquered most needs never to forget. They built, in those 11 cycles, the most extreme regime the discipline had ever conceived, the thing the directive had freed them to build, spare nothing, and they applied it to a small water tech from an ashfall world, and her body met it the way her body had met everything. It went down into the depth and it stayed there, small and calm and suffering more than any creature Vekel had ever tended and making almost no sound about it. And it did not break, because there was nothing in the regime that her world had not thrown at her ancestors 10,000 times across 1,000,000 lethal years, and her body carried the memory of surviving all of it, and the memory got there first. On the 7th of the 11 cycles, at the deepest hold, when the instrument swore she was past every ceiling a body had, Elin Marsh opened her eyes and found Vekel at the glass and spoke to him, and the translator flattened it, and even flattened it was the steadiest thing in the failing hall. "You're not going to find it," she said. Her voice came slow from a long way down but level. "The edge, there isn't one. You keep thinking there's a bottom to us, and if you just push hard enough we'll hit it. Ascendant. We are from a world that has been trying to hit our bottom since before your people stood up, and it never found it, and it tried so much harder than you, and it wasn't even trying." A long breath dragged up out of the depth. "We buried our children and kept the water clean. We buried our children and planted again in spring. We are made of the ones who did that over and over for longer than you can hold in your head. There is no regime in your book that my great-grandmothers didn't already survive on a Tuesday, holding a baby with nothing." She closed her eyes. "Let me go home. You're not spending me. You're spending you, and you're almost done." She was almost right about the almost. On the 9th cycle, the environmental order of the threshold, wounded past what decades of tuning could hold, finally gave way at the throat of the culture hall, and the 10,000 vessels, what was left of the 10,000, the archive already gutted, hundreds already inert, began to fail in a cascade the adepts could not stop. Not from Elin Marsh's defense this time. The harvested strength had done its work on the archive cycles ago and gone quiet, having, in its patient way, won. This was simpler. This was a machine run past every limit for a year, spared nothing, asked to hold 10,000 careful deaths in balance while its physicians burned it down trying to prove a wall could be pushed. It could not. It failed the way all overspent things fail, all at once and then all the way, and the culture hall that had held 911 endings filled with the sourness of its own ending, and the adepts fled the throat of the chamber, and the deaths the conquered had gathered across 2 centuries spoiled in their racks in the dark. Threll stood in the gallery through the cascade and did not run. Vekel found her there when the worst of it had passed, in the dimmed and ruined hall, the racks gone dark, the soft breath stopped, the archive a graveyard of inert vessels, and the one cell at the base still lit, still holding, still occupied by a small, calm woman with her back to the wall. "It is gone," Threll said. She did not turn from the dark racks. 2 centuries. 911 peoples. The single memory the discipline could not replace. Gone in a year to one host that would not be a weapon. Her translucent hands hung at her sides. "I staked my name on the demonstration. I told the curatorate it would be worth it. And the demonstration came, Vekel. Sorrel was right. The demonstration was that we could not do it, and it has been running the whole time, and I spent the archive and the station and my name refusing to read it." "Yes," Vekel said. There was nothing else true to say. "How did she do it?" Threll turned at last, and her dimmed eyes found his, and for the first time in 140 years, the discipline's living memory asked a question she did not have the answer to and needed one. She is not stronger than the Vuren were. She is not larger, not faster, not armored, not venomed. By every measure we have, she is a soft, small, short-lived thing. How did she unmake the whole discipline sitting with her back to a wall? And Vekel, who had stood at the glass for a year, gave Threll the only answer he had found in the dark. The answer Elin Marsh had been giving him all along in the plain words of a water tech. The answer the conquered had spent 911 victories never having to hear. Because she got there first, he said. Everything we brought, her world brought harder 1,000,000 years ago, and her kind answered it, or her kind is not here. We did not find a weak place to push. There is no weak place. She is the survivor of survivors, all the way down, and every one of them was made by a world that spared nothing before we ever learned the phrase. We thought we were the patient ones, overseer. We thought careful death was the deepest art in the galaxy. And then we met a people whose whole ordinary life is outlasting careful death, and who do not even feel special about it, because to them, he almost could not say it and said it, to them, it is Tuesday. Threll was quiet a long time in the ruined hall. Confine the host to nothing, she said at last, and Vekel did not understand her, and she saw that he did not, and she clarified in the flat, dead voice of a physician at the end of everything. No more regimes, no more draws. She has spared us and we did not read it, and she has spared us again, and I will not spend one more cell of that station on proving a wall can be pushed. The program is over, Ascendant, not because the curator rate ended it, because it was over the first afternoon, and I am the last one in this hall to say so. She looked toward the lit cell at the base of the dark. See to her, whatever is left in this ruin to see to her with, and begin the report the curator rate does not want. The true one, the one that ends careers. She left the gallery. Vekel stood alone in the dimmed hall among 2 centuries of spoiled death, and he went, as he had gone every cycle for a year, to the glass. Elin Marsh was awake. She had felt the cascade, felt the station die around her, and she sat against the wall of the one lit cell in the graveyard with her knee drawn up and watched him come, and there was no triumph in her. There had never once been triumph in her. There was only the deep tiredness of a person who has been proven right about a thing she took no joy in being right about. It's over, she said. Yes. You lost the whole house. Yes. She was quiet. Then in the plain, tired voice with the ruined hall dark behind him, I told you the first afternoon. You did, Vekel said. I have thought for a year about what it would have cost the conquered to listen to you the first afternoon. And I have thought about what it will cost us now that we did not. He set one of his 4 aged hands flat against the curved glass, the glass that had held 911 endings and would not hold hers. It was not supposed to be possible, what you are. The doctrine had no room in it for a people who got there first. We built the finest art in the galaxy on the certainty that every body carries its own ending, and you sat with your back to a wall and showed us a body that ends endings, and we could not bear it, and we spent everything we had refusing to look at you. He was quiet a moment. I am looking at you now. It is the only honest thing I have done in a year. Elin Marsh looked back at him through the glass, small and calm and unbroken in the wreck of the discipline that had tried for a year to prove she could break. And she said the thing that Vekel has carried longer than any of it, longer than the ruined archive or the staked name or the confined adept or the 11 cycles he will not describe. We're not special, Ascendant, she said. That's the part your whole book got wrong. We're not stronger or smarter or braver than the peoples you already ended. We just come from a place that never stopped trying to kill us, and we never stopped getting up, and after a while getting up is just what your body is. You went looking for the worst thing in us to point at our children. And the worst thing in us is that we don't stop, and you can't weaponize that. You can only lose to it. She set her forehead against her knee, tired past the end of tired. Send me home. Let the last thing this place did be the one thing it got right. The curatorate did not accept the true report either. Veckel had allowed himself, in the days after the cascade, a small and foolish belief that the truth, once written plainly by the discipline's own living memory, would be read. He should have known better. 90 years should have taught him that an institution does not fear a wall it cannot push half so much as it fears the person who says the wall is real. Threll's true report, the one that ended careers, the one that said in the compressed merciless language of the curatorate's own house that the doctrine had met a body it could not unwrite, and that the whole ledger stood on sand, that report reached the Concord's heart, and the Concord's heart did not read it as truth. It read it as failure of nerve. It read it as an overseer grown old and soft at the end of a long career, who had lost her station to mismanagement, and now sought to dress the loss in the language of the impossible, so that no one would ask why the finest apparatus in the Concord lay dark on a moon with its archive spoiled. They stripped her. The directive came on the next hull, sealed with the deepest sigils Veckel had ever seen, and it removed Vashti Threll from the discipline she had been the living memory of, not with honor, not with the quiet retirement her 140 years had earned, but with the particular cold thoroughness the Concord reserved for those whose failure it could not afford to have been necessary. Her name was struck from the tending of the Vuren, so that the discipline's purest work would now be taught as the work of no one. Her sigils were called back, and she was ordered to remain at the threshold, in the ruin she had made, to witness what the curatorate sent to replace her, because the curatorate had decided that the threshold's failure was a failure of will, and it was sending Will. Will arrived on the following hull in the person of Curator Inquisitor Daxus Vol. Veckel had heard of Vol the way one hears of a weather that happens to other regions. The Inquisitors were not physicians. They were the instrument the curatorate used when a discipline had begun, in its judgment, to doubt itself, when the tenders of a thing had lost the certainty that made the thing work, and needed certainty restored by someone who had never once in his life felt the lack of it. Vol did not come to the threshold to understand Alin Marsh. Understanding was the disease he had been sent to cure. He came to reassert, by the sheer force of a will that had never met a fact it could not overrule, that the doctrine did not fail, and if the host could not be broken, and the strength could not be turned, then the conquered would salvage the one thing left that might still be called a victory. It would take what the harvest program had gathered, the human strength drawn out and held in suspension in the deep vaults before the archive died, and it would stop trying to invert it, and it would simply deploy it, release it toward the human sphere as it was, raw, and trust that a thing this virulent, this unstoppable, this good at overrunning everything it touched, would surely overrun humanity too. The logic was a drowning man's logic. Vol did not care. Vol had been sent to produce a victory, and a weapon that ate a 2-century archive in a year looked, to a will that refused to understand it, exactly like a victory waiting to be aimed. You cannot aim it, Veckel told him on the first cycle in the ruined gallery because someone had to and Threll was stripped and Sorrel was confined and the saying of true things had fallen to the last physician left standing. Inquisitor, I have watched this thing for a year. It does not overrun humanity. It is humanity. It is the very thing a human body does, drawn out and set loose, and it overruns everything that is not that. It ate our archive because our archive was made of careful death, and it is made of stubborn life, and stubborn life eats careful death. That is the whole lesson of the threshold. But release it toward the human sphere and it will meet human bodies and it will find them full of exactly itself. The same stubborn life, got there first, 1,000,000 years ahead of us, and it will do nothing at all because you cannot drown a fish. And in the meantime it will have to be held and moved and deployed through our apparatus and our vaults and our hands, and everywhere it passes it will do to us what it did to the archive. You will not aim a weapon at humanity. You will open a door to the one thing in the galaxy our whole art has no answer to, and you will open it inside our own house, a second time, and call it will. Curator Inquisitor Vole heard him out. Then he had Vekel removed from the gallery, not confined, not yet. The conquered could not afford to confine its last physician, but removed, set aside, made to witness the way Threll was made to witness, so that the reasserting of certainty could proceed without the contamination of a man who had stood at the glass too long. And Vekel went to the glass, because the glass was the only place in the ruined station where the truth was not a thing you had to fight to say. They sent someone new, Elin Marsh said. She had felt it, the hull, the new scent in the recycled air, the change in how the surviving adepts moved. Someone who doesn't get it. Someone whose work is not to get it, Vekel said. He means to deploy what we took out of you, toward your world, as it is. For the first time in a year, something crossed Elin Marsh's face that was close to alarm. Not for herself, Vekel understood, but for the small, ordinary people at the far end of that intention, the watertechs and the grandmothers and the children planted again in spring. And then the alarm passed because she knew, better than Vekel did, what she was made of and what it would and would not do, and what crossed her face after the alarm was worse than alarm. It was sorrow for the conquered. "It won't touch us," she said quietly. "Know that? You just told him and he didn't listen. It'll get out there and find a whole world already full of it, and it'll have nowhere to go and nothing to do. We're not the ones it's dangerous to." She looked at him through the glass and her tired eyes were very clear. "It's dangerous to whoever's holding it, and that's you. Again, he's going to pick it up and it's going to do to your house what it does, and he's going to be standing closest." A breath. "Tell him not to. One more time, not for me. For the ones in your hall who didn't ask for any of this." Vekel tried. He put it in writing formally to the curatorate over Vole's head, the last formal act of a 90-year career, and it was the third true thing he had written, and the curatorate read it the way it had read the other two, as the failure of nerve of a discipline gone soft, and it did not stop Vole, and it marked Vekel, finally, as contaminated. But he tried. He has held on to that. When the whole reckoning came due, he was one of the two who had tried, he and the confined adept Sorrel, and it was not enough, and trying is not the same as stopping, and he has never once pretended it was. But he tried. Vole proceeded. The deployment apparatus was in the deep vaults, below the ruined culture hall, a facility built for the day the discipline would hand the conquered a finished weapon, and need to loose it cleanly across the dark toward a doomed world. It had never been used. It was pristine, the one pristine thing left in the threshold, and Vole brought the harvested human strength up out of cold suspension, and into that pristine apparatus with the confidence of a will that had overruled every fact placed before it, and he began the long, careful work of readying it to be aimed at the small, ordinary people who were, in the plain fact of their biology, immune to it, because they already were it. And the harvested strength, brought up warm out of the cold at last, set free of its suspension into the pristine apparatus, did what it had always done. It met its new world, the vaults, the apparatus, the readying itself, as one more lethal thing to survive, and it got there first, and it began patiently without malice, having no malice to win. It began in the vaults the way it had begun in the archive, quietly, with a count. Vole's adepts, he had brought his own, a hard, incurious cadre who did not stand at glass and did not lose their certainty, chosen for exactly that, reported on the third cycle that the deployment cradles were not holding their charge. The harvested strength, seated in the pristine apparatus to be readied for aiming, was not sitting still to be readied. It was moving. It was in the cradle it had been placed in, and then it was in the cradle beside that one, and the seals between them, seals rated for the loosing of a finished weapon across interstellar dark, meant nothing to it because it did not push against seals. It simply lived on both sides of them, the way water lives on both sides of a stone. The count that cycle was 3 cradles. The next cycle it was 11. Vole ordered the fouled cradles isolated, and the readying moved to fresh apparatus deeper in the vault, and the isolation held nothing, and the fresh apparatus fouled in its turn, and the count climbed, and Vekel, set aside in the ruined gallery above, watched the readings when the adepts were not looking and saw the shape of the archive's death coming again. Deeper this time, in the one part of the threshold that had still been whole. "He is doing exactly what we did," Vekel said. He had been permitted, on Threll's insistence. She was stripped, but she was not gone, and a stripped overseer in the ruin of her own station still carried weight the hard cadre had not learned to ignore, to sit with her in the gallery through the deployment cycles, two set-aside physicians watching a will that would not be told. Every move he makes to contain it spreads it. He isolates a cradle, and it is already in the next. He moves the readying deeper, and the deeper apparatus fouls. He is chasing it down into the vaults, and it is not fleeing him. It is filling the space behind him, and he cannot see it because he has decided it is a weapon, and weapons are aimed, not fled from. "He will chase it to the bottom of the station," Threll said. Her dimmed eyes did not leave the readings. "And when there is no deeper to go, he will understand what I understood in the gallery and what you understood at the glass and what she understood the first afternoon, that it is not a weapon, it is a fact, and you do not aim a fact, you survive it or you do not." She was quiet a moment. "We did not survive it. We were never in danger of our lives, Vekel, and still we did not survive it. It took the archive and the station and my name, and it will take his, and it never once knew we were there. That is the part the conquered will never be able to hold in its head. We were unmade by something that was not fighting us." The count reached 40 cradles on the 5th cycle, and on the 6th the deployment vault's own environmental order, the deep, redundant, overbuilt life-sustaining balance that let Sethric work in the sealed heart of a moon, began to fail under the strain of the isolations, exactly as the culture halls had failed, only faster, because the vaults were deeper and the redundancies fewer, and the thing moving through them was warmer and more awake than the quiet harvested strength that had gutted the archive. Vol's hard cadre, who did not lose their certainty, began, one by one, to lose their footing in the sealed dark as the order that kept them working failed around them. And Vol ordered the lower vault sealed and the readying pulled up to the level above, and the ceiling held nothing, because the fact he was chasing was already on the level above, having filled the space behind him, patiently, without malice, while he chased. They evacuated the lower vaults on the 7th cycle. Vekel watched Vol's incurious cadre come up out of the deep sealed heart of the threshold with their certainty gone ragged, and he felt no triumph, because Elin Marsh had taught him, through a year of glass, that triumph was a thing you felt when a matter was in doubt, and none of this had ever been in doubt. He felt only the old tiredness hers, that he had caught from her across the curved glass, the way a body catches a thing it has no defense against. The conquered had sent Will to the threshold to reassert that the doctrine did not fail, and Will had picked up the one fact in the galaxy that the doctrine had no answer for, and carried it into the deepest hole part of the station, and it had done there what it did everywhere, and now the deepest part of the station was dark too, and the count of ruined apparatus had passed anything Threll's harvest program had spent. And Curator Inquisitor Daxus Vol stood in a gallery 2 levels up from the sealed dark, and gave orders that meant nothing to a thing that did not take orders. Vekel went to the glass. The culture hall was dark around the one lit cell, the racks gone to graveyard, and now the deep hum that had always come up through the floor from the vaults below was ragged too, and Elin Marsh had felt it, and she sat against the wall of her cell in the double dark and waited. And when Vekel reached the glass, she read his face the way she had learned to read it across a year. "It's in the vaults now," she said. "Yes, it is doing to the deep station what it did to the archive. He chased it down and it filled the space behind him. They have evacuated the lower levels." Vekel set his hand against the glass. "You were right about the one holding it. His cadre came up out of the dark with their certainty gone. He is 2 levels above the sealed vault, giving orders to a thing that does not hear him." "He's going to keep going," Elin Marsh said. Not a question. She had watched 3 tiers of the conquered now, the physician, the living memory, the will, and she had learned the shape of them. "He can't stop. None of you could stop. That's the thing I keep not being able to make you hear. You built a whole civilization on being the ones who never lose, and when you finally meet the thing you can't beat, you can't even do the one thing that saves you, which is walk away. You'd rather take the whole house down chasing it than say out loud that it can't be caught. She drew her knee up. We'd have walked away the first afternoon. Any grandmother on my world would have looked at me the first afternoon and said, that one's not for us, leave it, and gone home and planted something. That's the strength you never wrote in your book. Not that we don't stop when we're getting up. That we do stop when a thing's not worth the getting up for. You never learned the second one, and it's killing you. Vekel stood at the glass a long time. Behind him, the double dark of the ruined station breathed its ragged breath. The culture hall gone. The vaults going. 90 years and 2 centuries and 140 of thrells, and the whole clean, elegant certainty of the discipline coming apart around one small woman who had told them, the first afternoon, to send her home and stop paying, and whom they had not been able to hear because hearing her would have meant walking away, and walking away was the one strength the conquered had never had. I do not think he will stop until the curatorate stops him, Vekel said, and I do not think the curatorate will stop him until the threshold is entirely dark. That is who we are. You have read us correctly. He was quiet. I am sorry that you have had a year to read us this well. So am I, said Aline Marsh, without heat, and set her forehead against her knee, and waited for the conquered to finish the thing it could not stop doing to itself. The curatorate stopped Vole on the 9th cycle, and it did not stop him out of wisdom. It stopped him because the threshold had begun, by then, to broadcast its own failure into the dark in a way the curatorate could not contain. A station does not die quietly. As the deep vaults went and the environmental order collapsed level by level, the automatic systems of the threshold did what they were built to do and sent their distress into the conquered's channels. Not the shaped, optimistic reports Vekel had learned to write, but the raw machine truth of a facility failing, apparatus counts and environmental cascades and evacuation logs, pouring into the curatorate's own records faster than any inquisitor's will could shape them. And the conquered's heart, reading that raw truth, understood at last what Threll's true report had told it, and what Vekel's formal warning had told it, and what a small water tech had told the whole station the first afternoon, that the threshold had met a thing it could not unwrite, and that the meeting was now unmaking the finest facility the discipline had ever built, from the inside, and would not stop being unmade until there was nothing left to unmake. They recalled Vole. The directive that recalled him did not use the language of failure, because the conquered could not yet afford, even to itself, the language of failure. It used the language of reassignment. But everyone who read it understood, and Vole understood, and Vekel watched the curator inquisitor read his own recall in the ruined gallery with the particular stillness of a will meeting, for the first time in a life built on never meeting it, a fact it could not overrule. Vole had been sent to reassert that the doctrine did not fail. He had picked up the proof that it did and carried it into the heart of the station, and now the station was dying of it, and his career was the least of what the conquered would lose, and he knew it, standing in the dark. He did not go to the glass. Vekel noticed that and understood it. The physician had stood at the glass and been unmade slowly and honestly across a year. The living memory had come to the glass at the end, when there was nothing left to lose, and asked her question and gotten her answer. But the will never went to the glass, not once, because the glass was where the truth was, and the will had been built, its whole life, to be the one thing in the conquered that never had to look at a truth it did not choose. Vole left the threshold the way he had come, incurious to the last, and Vekel thought that of all the things the conquered had spent on Aline Marsh, the saddest was that. After Vole, the conquered did the thing institutions do when a fact has finally forced its way past every will they sent to overrule it. It convened. The tribunal did not come to the threshold. Nothing came to the threshold anymore. The station had become, in the conquered's records, a place one did not approach. its deep systems fouled with a thing the discipline had no way to clear, its whole vast body slowly filling, level by level, with the patient stubborn life that had come up out of a small water-tech's arm. The supply hull stopped. The curatorate convened in its own clean chambers at the Concord's heart, 100 and more of the discipline's authorities, and it deliberated, and Veckel was made to give account across the dark. And Threll, stripped but not silenced, was made to give account, and even Sorrel, brought up from confinement to speak the thing he had spoken in the gallery, was made to give account, and Veckel listened across the long transmission lag. To the discipline he had served for 90 years try to find a shape it could survive for the fact that it had met a people it could not unwrite. It could not find one. That was the reckoning, and Veckel understood it as it happened, the way you understand a thing you have been walking toward for a year. The Concord's whole art, its whole self, its whole clean, elegant certainty, stood on a single load-bearing sentence. Every body carries its own ending. 911 times that sentence had held, and the holding had built a civilization that believed, all the way down, that it was the patient master of all biology, that no people it turned its art upon could survive, that the fist believers were fools and the Concord was the deepest and safest and most inevitable power in the galaxy because it fought with the one weapon nothing could refuse, a body's own betrayal. And the sentence had failed. Not bent. Failed. A small, short-lived, soft-bodied people from a world so lethal the Concord had needed its worst designation to hold it had been placed under the finest art the discipline could bring, spared nothing, and had sat with its back to a wall and not carried its own ending, because its body had gotten to every ending first, 1,000,000 years ahead, and had made of ending itself a thing it did without thought, the way the Sethric breathed. And if the sentence could fail once, it had never been a law. It had been a run of luck the Concord had mistaken for mastery, 911 peoples who happened not to be from HFY worlds, and somewhere out past the Concord's fringe, there was a whole human sphere full of exactly this, breeding fast and spreading faster, immune by their very nature to the only weapon the Concord had ever trusted, and the Concord had just spent its finest facility and its living memories named learning from a single captive. What it would cost to raise a hand against them, the tribunal did not say all of this aloud. Institutions do not. But it moved through the deliberation like the ragged breath had moved through the culture hall, under everything, unfilterable, and Veckel could taste it across the transmission lag, even flattened by the dark. The smell of a civilization understanding that it was not what it had believed itself to be. There was a faction that argued for the fire. Veckel had known there would be. There is always a faction that argues for the fire, that says the cleanest answer to a fact you cannot survive is to erase the place the fact lives and pretend it never was. They argued that the threshold should be ended entirely, station and archive graveyard and host and all, put beyond the dark so thoroughly that the raw machine truth already in the curatorate's records could be sealed and called a containment accident, and the doctrine could go on standing, and the 911 curves could keep being taught as law, and no adept in any future hall would ever have to stand at a glass and watch the sentence fail. Burn it, and the wall you could not push becomes a wall no one knows is there. It was Threll who broke that faction, stripped and nameless as she was, and Veckel has always been glad it was her. "You may burn the station," she said, across the lag, in the dead flat voice of a physician who has nothing left to lose and has therefore become, at the very end, free. "You may put the threshold beyond the dark and seal the records and teach the curves as law for another 2 centuries, but understand what you will have done. You will have taken the one true thing the discipline has learned in its whole history, that there are peoples we cannot unwrite, and that we had best learn to walk away from them the way they would walk away from us, and you will have burned it to keep a comfortable lie. And the human sphere will still be there, breeding fast, spreading faster, made of exactly what beat us. And some hall, some cycle, some adept who was taught the curves as law will raise a hand against them believing the doctrine cannot fail, and it will fail, and it will fail bigger than it failed here because he will not have been warned. You want to burn the warning to keep the lie. I tended the Vuren. I am the reason the discipline still stands. And I am telling you, the only thing worth carrying out of the threshold is the truth that we lost. Burn that and you have learned nothing, and you will pay for the learning again, larger, later, with more than a station. The tribunal did not burn the station. Veckel was never certain whether Threll's argument carried it, or whether the simpler fact carried it, that the threshold could no longer be approached closely enough to be reliably ended, that the patient stubborn life filling it made even the fire a thing you could not be sure of, so that in the end the conquered could neither use the station nor cleanse it nor destroy it, and could only do the one thing its whole nature had refused for 911 victories, which was walk away. Perhaps both. Perhaps a civilization needs a stripped old physician to give it permission to do the thing circumstance is already forcing on it. Either way, the directive came, on no hull, through the channels alone, because no hull would come near the threshold again. The station was to be abandoned. Sealed in the record as a containment loss. Left to the dark with its graveyard archive and its fouled vaults and its ragged failing breath, a monument the conquered would never admit it had built. To the single afternoon its doctrine died. And the host was to be released. Veckel read that line 4 times before he let himself believe it, and even then he understood it was not mercy. The conquered did not do mercy. Mercy was a fist-believer's weakness. It was arithmetic, the same cold arithmetic that had chosen humanity in the first place. Elin Marsh could not be kept, because keeping her meant a facility to keep her in, and every facility that had touched her was dying or dead. She could not be studied further, because study meant apparatus, and her strength ate apparatus. She could not be ended, because ending her meant approaching her, and the thing she was made of had made the whole station a place one did not approach. She was, in the conquered's ledger, a liability with only one disposition that did not cost more than it saved. Put her back on a human hull and let her go home, and let the human sphere have its water tech back, and let the threshold sink into the record as an accident, and never, ever, tell the adepts of the next generation why the finest facility the discipline ever built was left to rot around a graveyard on a moon. Release her. Because holding her had already cost more than any people the conquered had ever unwritten, and holding her one cycle longer would cost more still. And the one thing a small water tech had asked for from the first afternoon, send me home, stop paying, had become, at the bottom of everything, the only move left on the board that did not lose the conquered more than it had already lost. Veckel took the directive down to the glass himself. He did not send an adept. After a year, it was the one thing he was not willing to hand to anyone else. She was awake. The station was dark and rag-breathed around the one-lit cell, and she sat against the wall with her knee drawn up, and she read the directive in his face before he had shaped a word of it, the way she had read everything in his face for a year across the curved glass that had held 911 endings and would not hold hers. "They're sending me home," she said. "Yes." She was quiet a moment. Then, in the plain, tired voice without triumph, because there had never once been triumph in her, "It took losing the whole house." "It took losing the whole house," Veckel agreed. "The station, the archive, 2 centuries of the discipline's memory, the overseer's name, the inquisitor's career. And the one thing the conquered valued more than any of it, which it does not yet have the language to name, and which I will spend whatever is left of my 90 years finding the language for." He set his aged hand flat against the glass. "You asked me, the first afternoon, to send you home before I found out how much of my world I would spend learning what you are. I have found out. It was all of it. And I would not have believed you the first afternoon if you had shown me the ledger, because the doctrine had no room in it for a body that gets there first. And a man cannot believe a thing his whole world has no room for until his whole world is gone." He was quiet. "It is gone now. And I believe you." The release was not clean, because nothing at the threshold was clean anymore, and because a civilization does not lose the ground it stood on for 900 years without someone, somewhere in the wreck, reaching for one last handhold. A human hull would have to be signaled. That was the mechanism, cold and simple. The Conquered would open a narrow channel to the fringe where it had first brushed the human sphere, and it would release, along that channel, the coordinates of a drifting life pod and nothing else. No message, no admission, no name, and it would trust the humans to do what humans did, which was go and get their own out of the dark. The signaling itself would take cycles to arrange through the channels, and the human answer would take cycles more to arrive. And in the gap between the sending and the answering, the threshold would go on dying and emptying, the last adepts drawn off on the last hulls that would still come within reach, until the station was a dark and ragged breathing shell with a graveyard in its throat and a single lit cell at its base. And in that gap, in the emptying, an assessor named Sithra Kell decided that the Conquered was wrong to let her go. Kell had come with Vol, one of the hard, incurious cadre, and when Vol was recalled, Kell had not gone with him. Vekkel only understood later what she had stayed to do. She belonged to the faction that had argued for the fire, the ones who believed the cleanest answer to a fact you could not survive was to erase the place it lived. And when the tribunal ruled against the fire, and for the release, Kell had read the ruling the way her kind read every ruling that did not go their way, as a failure of will that a person of sufficient will was entitled to correct. She stayed behind on the emptying station, in the dark, unsanctioned, and she made her own quiet arithmetic. If the host could not be kept, and could not be studied, and could not be safely ended by the Conquered's careful means, then she would end her by uncareful means, alone, before the human hull came, and she would take from the ending whatever small sample a body yields in its last extremity, and she would carry that sample to the fire faction as the victory the whole discipline had failed to produce, proof, at last, that the deathworld body had a bottom. If only you were willing to be cruder than the discipline's honor allowed. It was a drowning woman's logic, the same logic as Vol's, one more layer down. Vekkel had come to understand that the whole descent of the threshold was people reaching for cruder and cruder handholds as the honest ones gave way, and Kell was the crudest, because she was the last, and the last handhold is always the ugliest. She came for Elin Marsh in the dimmed hall in what should have been the station's sleep cycle, when the few adepts still aboard were drawn off at the far end near the last dock, and she came without apparatus, because apparatus was the discipline's way and the discipline had failed, and she came meaning to do with her own four hands, and a will unclouded by a year at the glass, the thing the whole threshold had not managed with 2 centuries of art. Vekkel was not there. He has carried that too, that in the one moment the year came down to a body against a body, he was 2 levels up filing the release protocols, and it was not him at the glass. But he has the record, because the cell watched everything, the way the vector craft watched everything it grew, and he has read the record more times than he will say. The record shows a small woman come awake without fuss, one moment the slow breath of sleep and the next her eyes open and already reading, and it shows her watch the assessor enter the cell with no apparatus and understand. In the plain, fast way she understood everything, exactly what had come and why. And it shows her do the thing that Vekkel, watching the record, could not at first believe, though he had watched her for a year and should have known she would. She did not fight. She had never fought, not the draws, not the loads, not the 11 cycles. She had decided the first month that fighting spent a person on things not worth the spending, and she did not change her mind now, in the dark, with a will come to end her by hand. She sat up against the wall and she looked at the assessor, and the record's flattened translator gives her voice back level and tired and without any fear at all. "You're the fire one," Elin Marsh said, "the one who wanted to burn it all and pretend I never happened. A breath. You're going to try to do it yourself, with your hands. Because your whole clever art couldn't." She almost smiled and did not. "You should sit down, assessor. Not because I'm going to hurt you. I'm not. I've never hurt one of you, and I'm not going to start on the last night. You should sit down because you don't understand what you're standing in, and it's going to be the last thing you learn, and you should be sitting when it comes." Kel did not sit. Kel had not come to be spoken to by the specimen. She had come, with a will that had never met a fact it could not overrule, to overrule the last fact in the building. And the record shows what happened, and it is the reason Veckel has watched it more times than he will say, because it is the whole year distilled into a single dark minute, and it is the thing he most wants the conquered never to be able to forget. Kel raised her hands to do the uncareful thing, and the station, which was dying, which was filled level by level with the patient, stubborn life that had come up out of this very woman's arm a year ago, and had spent that year unmaking everything the conquered brought against it. The station chose that minute, as the emptying reached the culture hall at last, to finish failing in the throat above the cell. Not by Alin's doing. She did nothing. The record is clear. She sat against the wall with her tired eyes on the assessor and did nothing at all. But the ragged breath that had come up through the floor for cycles chose that minute to stop, the last environmental order in the hall giving way as the last adepts drew off, and the dark that had been filling the threshold from the vaults up reached the base of the culture hall in the exact minute assessor, Sithra Kel, raised her hands. And the cell that had kept one small woman alive and calm through a year of the discipline's worst was, in that minute, the one place in the failing hall the automatic system still fought to keep whole, because a released host was a directive, and directives held the systems even as everything else let go. The cell held, the hall did not. And Kel, standing in the hall with her hands raised, unclouded and incurious and crude, standing in the space the patient, stubborn life had been filling for cycles while abler people than she chased it downward, met the thing the whole discipline had met, in the one form even a will could not overrule, the plain failure of the air she had not thought to secure because she had come, like all of them, certain the danger was in the cell and not in the house. The record shows her understand it in the last clear second, the way Vole had understood his recall and Threll had understood her staked name, the way the whole conquered had understood, too late and at too great a cost, that it had never once been fighting the thing that was unmaking it. And it shows Elin Marsh, safe in the one-held cell, watch the assessor fall in the failing dark, and it shows her not look away, because she was not cruel and she was not kind. She was only a witness who had told the truth from the first afternoon and had earned the right not to flinch from where the not listening led. And it shows her say to the dark, in the level tired voice, the thing Veckel has carried longest of all, "I told you to sit down." Then the record shows her wait, the way she had waited for a year, for someone to come and open the cell and take her home, and it shows the automatic systems fight to keep the one held space whole around her while the rest of the threshold sank into the dark, and it shows nothing else, because there was nothing else. The last uncareful handhold had given way like all the careful ones before it, and the woman it had reached for sat against the wall with her knee drawn up, unbroken, and waited. Veckel reached the cell 4 minutes later, when the systems flagged the hall failure, and he came into a graveyard gone fully dark but for the one lit cell, and he found the assessor where the record had shown her fall, and he found Elin Marsh on the other side of the curved glass, awake, calm, alive, looking at him with the tired, clear eyes he had spent a year learning to read. "She came to do by hand what your book couldn't," Elin Marsh said, "and the house you built to catch me caught her instead, because she stood in the part of it that was already full of me and thought the danger was behind the glass. She was quiet a moment. I didn't do it, Ascendant. I want you to have that clear for whatever report ends your world. I sat here. I've sat here for a year. Everything that's happened to your people carried in and set loose and stood too close to. I'm just the thing you couldn't put down." "No," Veckel said. He was looking at the fallen assessor and at the dark graveyard and at the small unbroken woman in the one lit cell, and he was understanding, fully and finally and for the rest of his life, the shape of what the conquered had done to itself. "You have never once been the danger. You have only ever been the fact. and we could not stop reaching for you, and every hand we reached with, the house took. He straightened slowly, his 4 hands gone still. I am going to open the cell now. The human hull is coming. And I am going to walk you out of here myself, through all of it, so that you see, and so that I see, exactly what it cost to fail to send you home the first afternoon. He opened the cell. It was a strange thing, after a year, to stand in a hall with no glass between them. Vekel had watched Elin Marsh through curved material for so long that when she stepped out of the cell into the dead graveyard of the culture hall, he found himself, absurdly, unready for her scale a second time. Not the way she had been small behind the glass, but the way she was small standing free in the ruin of the finest facility the discipline had ever built. A soft, short-lived thing in a worn survey coverall the intake had never taken from her, standing among 2 centuries of spoiled endings. Having outlasted every one of them without lifting her hand, she looked at the dark racks. She looked at them a long time. That's the library, she said, not a question. She had understood from a year of Vekel's face what the racks had held, all the peoples you ended. All the ones who did carry the thing you went looking for. She was quiet. They weren't weak, were they, the ones in these racks? They were just from softer worlds than mine, worlds that let them grow up thinking the water was safe. Something moved in her tired face, and it was not triumph, it was the old grief, the grief Vekel had first seen when she understood what the harvested strength was doing to the archive. I don't feel like I beat them, any of them. I feel like I got lucky about where I was born and they got unlucky, and you called the difference a science and built a moon around it. She turned from the racks. Take me somewhere that isn't this. I'll wait for the hull anywhere but here. He took her up through the emptying station, and it was on that slow passage, the 2 of them moving through the failing halls, the last systems fighting to hold air around a released host and her keeper while everything else let go, that Vekel came to understand the last part of what she was, the part the glass had hidden. Behind the glass she had been the specimen, the fact, the wall the discipline could not push. Out of the cell, walking the dead corridors of the thing that had tried for a year to unmake her, she was simply a young woman going home the long way through the wreck of the people who would not let her. And she was tired. And she was kind in the flat, unshowy way of someone who has decided that cruelty spends a person on nothing. And she stopped once at a viewport where the moon's dead gray curved away beneath them, and the stars stood past it, and she looked out at the dark for a long moment and said, without turning, "That's the way home, somewhere out there." "Yes," Vekel said. "I stopped believing I'd see it about 8 months ago," she said, not in a giving-up way. "I just did the arithmetic, same as you people love to do, and it came out that you'd never let a specimen go because letting me go meant admitting you couldn't use me, and your whole world was built on being the ones who could use anything." She was quiet. "I was wrong about the arithmetic. I forgot to carry the cost. You'd never let me go until keeping me cost more than your whole world could pay, and it did, so here I am at a window." She almost smiled. "My grandmother would have liked that. She used to say the meanest fence in the world will open if the thing behind it gets expensive enough to keep." She was talking about a goat. "But it holds." They found Threll in the old console gallery, which was one of the last places the system still held, and the stripped overseer was doing the thing Vekel had not expected and would remember. She was recording. Not for the curatorate had struck her name and would not read her, but for the adepts of some generation the conquered had not yet raised, laying down. In the deporter language she was no longer permitted to use and used anyway, the true account of the threshold, the honest curves, the failed sentence, the whole shape of the afternoon the doctrine died. She looked up when they came in, and she saw the host walking free beside her keeper, and something crossed the ancient, translucent face that Vekel had never once seen on Threll in 140 years of her legend, and it took him a moment to name it, and when he named it his hands went still, because it was relief. "So they are letting you go," Threll said, to Elin Marsh directly, the first time she had ever addressed the host as anything but a candidate. "Good. I have argued for a great many endings in my life, Watertech. I tended the Vurin. I am the reason a people you will never hear named are not in the galaxy anymore. And at the very end of it I find I am glad past the striking of my name, that the last thing I argue for is a released host and an honest record. It is a poor trade for a career. It is the only trade I have left that I am not ashamed of. She inclined her cowl, the deep formal gesture, the one an overseer gave an equal. You beat the discipline sitting with your back to a wall. I want you to know that the one who tended the Vurin said so in the record where they struck her name. You beat us, and you were right to ask, the first afternoon, to be sent home. We would have kept everything we lost if we had listened to a Watertech over our own doctrine. A pause. We could not. It is the truest thing I know about my own people, and I have put it in the record too. Elin Marsh looked at the stripped old physician for a long moment, and Veckel watched two beings from two ends of the galaxy who had spent a year on opposite sides of curved glass regard each other, at last, with nothing between them. And what passed between them was not forgiveness, because forgiveness was not a thing on offer and Elin Marsh was too honest to pretend it. But it was something adjacent to it, something colder and truer. A mutual recognition of exactly what had happened, and exactly what it had cost. I don't forgive you, Elin Marsh said. I want to be clear about that because you've been honest and you deserve honest back. The ones in those racks don't get forgiven by me feeling generous about it, but I'll tell you what I do. She was quiet a moment. When I get home, I'll tell them the truth. Not that we're strong, not that we're special, just that there's a people out here who fight wars by turning bodies against themselves, and that they lost to us not because we're better but because of where we grew up, and that they were smart enough at the very end to have one old woman in the room who said walk away. I'll tell them you exist. I'll tell them you learned. That's more than the ones in the racks got. It's not forgiveness, but it's the truth, and out where I'm from, the truth is what you plant when the ground's been salted. It's all that grows there. She turned to Veckel. Is the hull coming or not? It is coming, Veckel said. The channel had been opened while they climbed. The coordinates had gone out into the dark toward the human fringe, a drifting life pod and nothing else, no message, no name. And the answer had come back faster than the Concord's own analysts had projected, because the analysts had modeled the humans on the peoples in the racks, and the humans were not the peoples in the racks. The humans had heard one of their own was in the dark and had come, hard and fast, and without asking the Concord for anything. A lean human recovery hull burning in along the coordinates with the particular brute directness. The Concord had spent a year learning to fear in miniature. It is coming faster than we thought. Your people do not deliberate the way we deliberate. They heard you were out here. They are already most of the way. He paused. Adept Sorrel is at the last dock. I had him released from confinement. He asked to be the one to see you off. He said. Veckel stopped and gave it to her plainly because she had earned plain things. He said he wanted to stand at the dock and watch a human go home, because he had spent a year watching the discipline try to make sure no human ever would, and he wanted the last thing he did at the threshold to be the opposite of the work. Something eased in Elin Marsh's tired face, briefly, the first thing close to warmth Veckel had seen in her in a year. The young one who said the true thing in the gallery, she said. The one they confined for it. You heard that. I hear everything through that glass, Ascendant. You never did figure that out. She started toward the last dock, and Veckel fell in beside her, keeper and released host walking the last corridor of the dead station together, and she said, almost to herself, good. I'm glad it's him. Every rotten place I've ever been had one of him in it. The one who says the true thing and gets confined for it. They're the reason the truth survives the place. You should promote that one, Ascendant, if your world's got any promoting left in it after this. A breath, though I expect it doesn't. No, Veckel said, I do not expect it does. The last dock was cold. The systems there had been let go days before, held now only by the emergency order that governed a released host, and the air had the thin, flat taste of a place the station had stopped caring about. and Nemusorel stood in it alone at the edge of the great sealed aperture with his cowl marked by the confinement he had been let out of only that cycle, and he watched the host and the ascendant come, and his scent, when they reached him, was the steadiest thing left in the threshold. "Water tech," Sorrel said. He had no rank left to speak from. The confinement had cost him the little he had. He spoke anyway. "I said in the gallery that the demonstration the curatorate wanted had already happened, and that we were standing inside it and they confined me for it. I want you to know I was not being brave. I was being a physician. A physician reads the case in front of him and says what it says, and the case in front of me for a year said that you could not be unwritten, and that we were spending the conquered finding out, and that the honest thing and the useful thing were the same thing, which was to send you home. That is all I said. They confined me for the honest thing and the useful thing at the same time in the same sentence." He was quiet a moment. "I do not tell you this for absolution. I tell you because I want one human, going home, to know that not all of us needed the whole house to fall before we could read the case. Some of us read it in the first season. We were simply not the ones with the authority to act on the reading." His cowl tipped. "I am sorry it took the house. I am sorry it took the archive and the overseer's name and the assessor in the hall. I read the case right and it did not matter because I was young and confined, and reading a case right does not save anyone if the ones with the authority have decided not to look. I will carry that. I wanted you to carry in exchange that you were read, early, by someone. It is a small thing to hand you after a year in a cell. It is the only thing I have." Elin Marsh looked at the young adept for a long moment, and Vekel watched her decide something. And then she did a thing she had not done once in a year, a thing the record would show and Vekel would never forget. She reached out slowly, so the alien could see it coming, and she set her small, soft, short-lived hand flat against the back of one of Sorrel's four, the way the Sethric touched to mark a thing agreed between equals, a gesture she should not have known and had learned, Vekel understood, the way she learned everything, by watching through the glass for a year while they thought they were the ones watching her. "You read the case right," she said. "That matters, not enough to save the ones in the racks. Not enough to save your station or your overseer's name. But it matters to me, standing here going home, that in a whole institution built to end my people there was one of you who looked at me and saw a case that said send her home. You keep saying it's a small thing. Out where I'm from, that's not a small thing. Out where I'm from, that's the whole difference between a people you can live next to and a people you have to end. Your Concord's got at least one of him in it." She took her hand back. "So it's not all racks. Remember that when it falls. It's not all racks, there's you." The human hull came in then. Vekel had feared it, a little, without admitting the fear. A year of learning what one human could do to the finest facility the discipline had ever built had left him with a picture of the human sphere that his reason knew was disproportionate, and his body believed anyway, and he had half expected the recovery hull to arrive like a judgment, like the fleets the Fist-believers had used, like the reckoning the conquered had spent a year earning. It did not. It arrived like a work vessel, lean, scarred, unlovely, burning in along the coordinates with a directness that had no ceremony in it at all, matching the dead dock's aperture with a competence that spoke of people who did this often, who went out into the dark and brought their own back as a matter of course, without deliberation, because a body of theirs was out there, and that was simply what you did. There was no armada. There was no announcement. There was one lean hull and a crew Vekel never saw, doing a routine thing routinely, and it was, he understood, watching it seat itself against the aperture, far more frightening than an armada, because an armada was a decision, and this was a habit. The humans had not sent a fleet to answer the conquered. They had not answered the conquered at all. They had simply come to get Elin Marsh, the way you go and get a thing that is yours, and the conquered did not enter into it, and that indifference was the most complete defeat the discipline had suffered yet. "They're here," Elin Marsh said, and for the first time in a year Vekel heard something move in her voice that was not level and not tired, something small and cracked and human that she had kept behind the glass for a year and let show now at the very last at the aperture, with home on the other side of it. That's a reclamation hull. I know that class. I've served on that class. Her breath went uneven for exactly 1 moment, and then she mastered it, the same mastery Vekel had watched her hold through the loads in the 11 cycles, only turned now on joy instead of pain. They came. I did the arithmetic wrong and they came anyway. They always come. That's the other thing you never wrote in your book, Ascendant. You wrote down that we don't stop when we're getting up. You never wrote down that we come back for each other. You should have. It's the more dangerous half. The aperture began its long cycle open. And Vekel, standing at the edge of it beside the released host and the confined adept, and the stripped overseer who had come down to watch, understood that he was witnessing the exact thing the whole discipline had been built to prevent, and had, in the end, brought about with its own 4 hands a human, going home, out of the conquered's own deepest facility, alive, unbroken, having cost the conquered more than any people in the racks, and given the conquered nothing. And carrying home with her the one thing the conquered could least afford her to carry, which was the truth, that there was a people out here that fought with careful death, that the careful death did not work on humans, that the whole vast patient art of the conquered was, against a people who got there first, not an art at all but a long expensive way to lose. She would take that home, and the human sphere would have it, and the human sphere would do with it whatever a fast-breeding, fast-spreading ashfall people did with the knowledge that the deadliest civilization it had yet met had tried its worst and failed. The conquered had spent a year and a station, and a doctrine to teach humanity that lesson. Vekel did not know what the humans would do with it. He knew only that they now had it, and that the having of it was the threshold's true and final product. The one thing the finest facility the discipline ever built had actually succeeded in making, a human who knew. The wider fall reached Vekel in fragments, over the cycles of the release, the way the truth of a great collapse always reaches the people standing inside it, not as a single announcement, but as a slow accumulation of things no longer done. A hall on another moon, one of the great tending halls where the discipline grew its endings, went quiet in the channels and did not answer. A requisition Vekel filed, almost by reflex, for the disposition of the threshold's records, was answered by an office that had not existed a season before, staffed by names he did not know, in a language of reorganization that meant, under its careful surface, that the curator rate of vectors was being unmade and rebuilt as something that did not yet have a doctrine. The 911 curves were not being taught anymore. No directive said so. Directives never said so. But the adepts who would have been sent to learn them were being sent elsewhere, and the halls that would have grown the next endings were going quiet one by one, and the whole vast patient art that had believed itself the deepest power in the galaxy was, without any announcement, without any admission, folding itself away. Because a single watertech had proved that its load-bearing sentence was not a law, and a civilization that has learned its deepest certainty is a run of luck, does not keep building on it. Whatever it tells the ledger. They were not going to raise a hand against the human sphere. That was the thing Vekel read, at last, under all the reorganization, and it was the truest measure of what a Lynn Marsh had done sitting with her back to a wall. The conquered had chosen humanity out of arithmetic, and it was unchoosing humanity out of arithmetic, the same cold some run the other way. A people you could not unwrite, who bred fast and spread faster and came out of the dark to reclaim their own as a matter of habit, and who now knew exactly what the conquered had tried, and exactly how completely it had failed. That was not a people you raised a hand against a second time. That was a people you learned to avoid. Quietly, the way the peoples in the racks had never been able to avoid the conquered, the whole order of predator and prey inverted by one afternoon on one moon. The conquered would not announce that it feared the human sphere. It would simply, from that season on, never be found near it, and it would call the never being found by some cleaner name, and the adepts of the next generation would grow up knowing, without being taught, that there was a region of the dark the conquered did not go, and most of them would never learn why. Vekel told Elin Marsh some of it, at the aperture in the last minutes, because she had earned the knowing, and because he did not think he would ever have the chance to tell another human the truth and have it reach the sphere. "Your people will not be troubled by us again," he said. "I want you to carry that home as certainly as you carry the rest, not because we have grown kind. We have not. Because we have run the arithmetic and you come out of it as a cost we cannot pay, and the conquered does not pay costs it cannot pay. The discipline is folding. The halls are going quiet. The whole art that chose your world is unchoosing it this season without ever saying your name. You did that, sitting with your back to a wall, giving the draw, waiting. You unmade the deepest power in the galaxy by being a fact it could not survive learning." He paused. "I do not know if that is a comfort. I have found in 90 years that the largest things one does are rarely comforts. But it is true, and you taught me to prefer the true thing to the comfortable one, and so I give you the true thing." "It's not a comfort," Elin Marsh said. "You're right about that. Nothing about this is a comfort. I lost a year I don't get back. I watched a woman die in a hall because she couldn't stop reaching for me. I stood in a room full of racks that used to be whole peoples." She was quiet, looking through the widening aperture at the lean, scarred hull that was home. "But it's not nothing, either. You came out here to make me the thing that ends my own people. And instead I'm the thing that ends your reaching for them. That's not a comfort. But it's a straight trade, and out where I'm from we'll take a straight trade over a comfort any day. Comfort's rot. A straight trade you can build on." She turned to him one last time, the small, dirt-worn woman in the survey coverall, tired past the end of tired, unbroken, going home. "You want to know the thing you got most wrong, Ascendant, in your whole book, the thing under all the other things?" "Tell me," Vekel said. "I have spent a year learning to want the things you tell me." "You thought the worst thing about us was in our blood," she said. "The sickness, the betrayal you went looking for. You thought if you could just get at the thing our bodies carry, you'd have us. And you were half right. There is a worse thing about us, and it is in us, and it's the reason you lost. But it was never in our blood. It's in the part your instruments can't draw." She tapped her own chest once over the coverall, a small, flat human gesture. "We don't stop when we're getting up. We come back for each other through the dark. And we'll take a hard, true thing over a soft, false one every time, even when the true thing costs us a year and a woman in a hall and a room full of racks. That's the worst thing about us. That's the thing you can't weaponize and can't outlast and can't run the arithmetic against, because it doesn't sit still in a vessel. It doesn't bloom. It doesn't break. It just keeps getting up and coming back and telling the truth. You spent your whole world learning that. I hope you're one honest adept writes it down before the halls all go quiet. It's the only thing you learned out here that was worth the price." The aperture stood full open now, and the cold, clean air of the human hull came through it, and on the other side Vekel could see, at last, the shapes of the crew that had come for her, lean and scarred and unlovely like their ship, doing a routine thing routinely, one of them already lifting a hand toward the small figure at the Concorde's aperture. Not in ceremony, just in recognition, just in the plain, flat fact of one of theirs found and brought back. The way you lift a hand to a thing you have come a long way to reclaim. She did not rush the crossing. That was the last thing Vekel learned about her, and the most human, and the one he has thought about most in the season since. A being who had spent a year in a cell, with home 3 steps away through an open aperture, and she did not rush. She stood at the line between the dead Concord station and the lean human hull, and she took the time to turn back, one final time, to the 3 of them who had come down to the cold dock to watch her go, the stripped overseer, the confined adept, the unmade physician, and she gave them not a farewell, because farewell was too warm a thing and she was too honest for it, but an accounting, flat and final, the last true thing the threshold would ever hear from the fact it could not survive. "I'm going to go home now," Elin Marsh said. And I'm going to get better all the way, because that little sickness you built a whole moon around is going to be gone inside a month the same way it was always going to be gone, because my body finished with it a long time before you ever thought to want it. And I'm going to go back to work. Water, same as before, nothing special. And the whole rest of my life I'm going to know something almost nobody home knows, which is that there was a people out here in the dark who tried to turn me into the end of my own kind, and who spent everything they had on it, and who failed so completely they had to unchoose my whole world and fold up their whole science and creep away and never say why. She looked at each of them in turn, without heat, without triumph, with the tired, clear honesty that had been the one constant of a year. I won't hate you for it. Hate's a comfort, and I told you what I think of comforts, but I'll remember it exactly, and I'll tell it exactly. And that's worse for you than hate, because hate fades and the exact truth doesn't, and the exact truth is that you were the deepest power in the galaxy and you lost to a tired woman who just wanted to go home and wouldn't stop being one. A breath. You should have sent me home the first afternoon. I'll say that part every time. It's the part that matters. You had a whole year of afternoons to just let me go. And your world was built so you couldn't. That's the thing to write down, adept. Not that we're strong. That they couldn't stop, and we could just leave. Then she turned, and she crossed, and she was through the aperture and onto the human hull, and Vekel watched the lean, scarred crew close around her. Not with ceremony, still, never with ceremony, just with the plain, competent warmth of people folding one of their own back into the fold. A hand on her shoulder, a coverall unsealed and a warmer one held out. A voice Vekel could not translate, saying something short that made the tired woman's face do the thing it had not done in a year, which was ease. All the way into the face of someone who is finally, actually, home. And the aperture began its long cycle closed, and the last Vekel saw of Elin Marsh, she was not looking back at the threshold at all. She was looking into the hull, at her own people, already gone from the conquered in every way that mattered, the station and the doctrine, and the year behind the glass falling away from her like a coat she had needed once and did not need now. The aperture sealed, the lean hull detached from the dead dock with the same unceremonious competence it had arrived with, and its light pulled away across the gray curve of the moon, and dwindled, and was one more star, and then was not even that. And the threshold hung in the dark with its graveyard and its fouled vaults and its ragged failing breath, emptied at last of the one thing that had ever mattered in it, which was the woman it could not use. Vekel did not stay long after that. There was no reason to. The station was dying and there was nothing left in it to tend, and the last hull that would come within reach of the threshold was already inbound to draw off the final few. He went with Threll and Sorrel, the three of them, the keepers of the record, the ones who had read the case right or come to read it, gathered by circumstance into the small, honest remnant of a discipline that had unmade itself. They did not speak much on the passage out. There was not much to say that the year had not already said. But Vekel carried in the sealed archive of his own making 3 records laid together, Threll's, unauthorized in the language they had struck her for using, Sorrel's, the young clear account of a case read right and ignored, and his own 90 years of certainty ending in a single true sentence he had needed the whole year and the whole ruined station to be able to write. He did not know if the records would ever be read. The conquered was folding the discipline away and did not want its memory kept. But Threll had taught him, at the very end, the thing the water tech had taught her, that the only thing worth carrying out of a ruin is the truth of how it fell, and that a truth written down survives the institution that would rather burn it, the way a seed survives the fire that clears the ground. He thought about the seed a great deal in the seasons after. The conquered had gone to the human sphere looking for a seed, the small betrayal every body carried, the thing that could be tended into an ending. It had built a moon to grow that seed. And it had found, instead, a people who were themselves the seed, in the older and truer sense, the thing that survives the fire, that outlasts the salting of the ground, that gets up and comes back and keeps, past every careful death the galaxy can tend. The conquered had spent 911 victories learning to end peoples who carried their own ending. And then it had met a people who carried, instead, their own beginning over and over, all the way down, and it had not had a single instrument that could measure that, because it had never once in its whole history needed one. Vekel is old now, older than Threll was when she came to the threshold, and the discipline he gave 90 years to is gone, folded away into offices with new names, its curves untaught, its halls quiet, its long, clean certainty ended on a moon that no one approaches. He does not regret its ending. That is the last thing the year at the glass did to him, and he has made his peace with it. He does not regret that the deepest power in the galaxy learned it was not what it believed. A power that fights with careful death should meet, once, a people it cannot end. It is the only thing that teaches such a power the one lesson it can never learn on its own, which is where the edge of its reach actually lies and what lives past that edge, and why you leave it alone. Sometimes, in the long Sethric stillness that is not sleep, he thinks of her at the window on the way up through the dead station, looking out at the dark and saying that was the way home, somewhere out there. He thinks of how she did the arithmetic and got it wrong, because she forgot to carry the cost, and of how the arithmetic came right in the end anyway, because her people came out of the dark to reclaim her the way they always came, the more dangerous half of the thing the conquered never wrote down. He thinks of the small, flat gesture, her hand over her own chest, telling him the worst thing about her kind was in the part his instruments could not draw. And he thinks most of all of the last thing she said before she crossed, the part she promised to say every time, the part that mattered that they could not stop, and she could just leave. The threshold is still out there, dark on its moon, sealed in the record as a containment loss, filling slowly with the patient, stubborn life that came up out of one woman's arm and outlasted everything the discipline could bring against it. No one goes near it. In another 2 centuries, perhaps, some adept of some reorganized office will find the sealed records Vekel carried out, and read Threll's unauthorized curves and Sorrel's clear young account, and the single true sentence of an old physician, and understand, as the conquered as a whole has chosen never quite to understand, exactly what happened on that moon and exactly what it cost, and exactly why the discipline was folded away. Vekel hopes so. He wrote it plainly, for that adept, in the plainest language he had, the language the Watertech taught him to prefer. He wrote, "We went out to make a captive into the end of her own people. We had ended 911 peoples this way, and we were certain, and we were wrong. Her body would not be used. It met everything we brought as a thing to be survived, and it survived it, and it had survived it 1,000,000 years before we arrived, and we could not reach a single afternoon ahead of what her world had already taught her. We spent the finest facility we ever built, and our living memories name, and the deepest certainty of our whole civilization, learning that there are peoples the careful art cannot touch, because they got to the ending first and made of ending a thing they do without thinking. She never raised her hand against us. She asked, the first afternoon, only to go home. We could not let her, because our whole world was built so that we could not, and it cost us our whole world to learn that hers was built so that she could always, in the end, just leave. He signed it with his name, which the conquered had not yet struck, and it would not matter, because a truth written down outlasts the striking of the name that wrote it, the way a seed outlasts the fire. And far out past the fringe, past the region of the dark the conquered would never again be found near, a tired young woman who fixed water for a living had long since gone home, and gotten better inside a month exactly as her body had always meant to, and gone back to work. Nothing special, one more ordinary person on an ordinary world that had never once thought of itself as the deadliest thing in the ledger. She did not build a weapon. She did not deploy a plague. She did not raise a hand against anyone, not even the ones who had spent a year raising theirs against her. She simply endured them and outlasted them and walked out through the wreckage of everything they were, and went back to the small true work of keeping the water clean. And behind her, on a moon no one approaches, the deepest power in the galaxy sank quietly into the dark, having learned, too late and at the cost of everything, the one thing about her people it could never draw, never bloom, never break, and never ever survive. They simply do not stop, and when a thing is not worth the getting up for, they are the only ones wise enough to walk away.